The UN has come up with a shocking, insidious plan for global domination, Michael Snyder reports. Under a shocking new plan that is scheduled to be adopted 2 months before the US presidential election in 2024, all it would take for in some sort of a major global shock for the United Nations to literally take authority over the entire planet. I realize that this may sound like the plot to a really bad science fiction movie, but this is actually what is being proposed, and the Biden administration is fully behind this insidious plan. Unfortunately, the mainstream media in the United States is not covering this at all, and so most people have absolutely no idea that this is going on. An article that was posted by the Federalist first broke the story, and it should be making headlines news all over the nation, but it isn't. Next September, global leaders will gather for the Summit of the Future, quote unquote. During that conference, UN member states are scheduled to adopt a pact for the future. In September 2024, less than 2 months before the next US presidential election, the United Nations will host a landmark Summit of the Future, where member nations will adopt a pact for the future. The agreement will solidify numerous policy reforms offered by the UN over the past 2 years as part of the sweeping Our Common Agenda platform. Although there are numerous radical proposals included in the agenda, perhaps none are more important than the UN plan for a new emergency platform, quote unquote, a stunning proposal to give the UN significant powers in the event of future global shocks such as another worldwide pandemic. And you can read all about the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future on the official UN website right here in the link. As usual, the UN disguises the most alarming portions of their agenda by surrounding it with language that speaks of the need for peace, education, and economic growth. But right there on the official UN website, they admit that one of the purposes of the Summit of the Future is to put in place a stronger international response playbook for complex global shocks, maximizing the use of the Secretary General's convening power in the form of an emergency platform. So what in the world is this emergency platform that they're talking about? Well, the UN policy paper that was published a few months ago contains some very disturbing details. Many of the details of the UN emergency platform were laid out in the March 2023 policy paper entitled Strengthening the International Response to Complex Global Shocks, an Emergency Platform. And in the paper, the UN Secretary General writes, I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations systems with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an energy platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach. Once triggered, the emergency platform would give the UN the ability to actively promote and drive an international response that places the principles of equity and solidarity at the center of the work. The UN would bring together the stakeholders of the world, including academics, governments, private sector actors, and international financial institutions, to ensure there is a unified global response to the crisis. No thank you. If there is some sort of a major global shock, at least things that we should want is, the last thing is for the UN to have the authority to ensure there is a unified global response in the crisis. So what sort of a global shock would activate these emergency powers? Well, the policy paper tells us that a future pandemic, a major event in outer space, or even unforeseen risks would all qualify. The paper gives several examples of what could trigger the emergency authority, including major climactic event, future pandemic risks, a global digital connectivity disruption, major event in outer space, and generic unforeseen risks, black swan events. In other words, whether or not these emergency powers could be used would be open to interpretation. And it turns out that once these emergency powers have been activated, the UN would have authority to keep extending them indefinitely. The UN would also reserve the right to extend the emergency as they see fit, although the duration of the emergency platform would initially be set for a finite period. At the end of that period, the Secretary General could extend the work of the emergency platform if required, according to the United Nations' own policy proposal. So once enacted, the UN could continue to seize control as long as they want, hence indefinitely. And this is precisely how Emperor Palpatine took over the Star Wars movies. He was granted emergency powers by the Senate, and then he never gave them up. Of course, the Biden administration thinks that all of this is just great. In fact, the administration has already publicly backed this new proposal on multiple occasions. The Federalist Report notes that the Biden administration has backed the proposal on multiple occasions, prompting reporter Justin Haskins to warn that if the emergency platform is approved, the United States, as we know it, would cease to exist. Please share this information far and wide, because the American people need to understand that this is really happening. Thankfully, the Summit of the Future is not until September 2024, but in September 2023, the 2023 SDG Summit will be held in New York City. The following comes from the official UN website page about the summit. The 2023 SDG Summit will take place on 18 to 19 September 2023 in New York. It will mark the beginning of a new phase of accelerated progress towards Sustainable Development Goals, with high-level political guidance on transformative and accelerated actions leading up to 2030. Convened by the President of the General Assembly, the summit will mark the halfway point to the deadline set for achieving the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. It will be a centerpiece for the high-level week of the General Assembly, and it will respond to the impact of multiple and interlocking crises facing the world, and is expected to reignite the sense of hope, optimism, and enthusiasm for the 2020 Agenda. We're less than 7 years from 2020, and the UN wants to remind global leaders to keep implementing the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. On the surface, the goals that the UN wants to achieve sound rather harmless, but if you dig into the details, you'll find that the 2030 Agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint for creating a far-left globalist utopia. And the centerpiece for that blueprint is a draconian global effort to fight climate change. As I discussed the other day, thousands of farms in Europe are being purchased and shut down right in the middle of a global food crisis in order to meet climate change goals. This is madness. The globalists are already doing so much damage, and now they want us to give up the UN unprecedented emergency powers. Needless to say, giving the globalists even more power won't lead anywhere good. And if we plan to object to what they're doing, the time to stand up and speak out is now. Unfortunately, most Americans don't even realize that any of this is happening, and that's because hardly anyone is even talking about this. This is by Michael Snyder. He says about the author, "My name is Michael, and my brand new book entitled End Times is now available on Amazon. In addition to my new book, I've written 6 other books that are available on Amazon, including 7-Year Apocalypse, Lost Prophecies of the Future of America, The Beginning of the End, and Living a Life That Really Matters, Commissions Earned. When you purchase any of these books, you help to support the work that I'm doing, and one way that you can really help is by sending copies as gifts to families and friends. Time is short, and I need help getting these warnings out into the hands of many people as possible. So I've also started a brand new Substack newsletter, and I encourage you to subscribe so you won't miss any of the latest updates. I have published thousands of articles on the Economic Collapse blog, End of the American Dream, and the Most Important News, and the articles that I publish on those sites are republished on dozens of other prominent websites all over the globe. I always freely and happily allow others to republish my articles on their own websites, but I also ask they include this about the author section with each article. The material contained in this article is for general information purposes only, and readers should consult licensed professionals before making any legal, business, financial, or health decisions. I encourage you to follow me on social media, Facebook and Twitter, and any way that you can share these articles with others is definitely a great help. These are such troubled times and people need hope. John 3:16 tells us about the hope that God has given us through Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. If you have not already done so, I strongly urge you to invite Jesus Christ to be your Lord and Savior today. And this is by Michael Snyder on End of the American Dream. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.